Welcome back to Oh and Another Thing, your favorite news and politics podcast, your favorite news and politics YouTube program if you are joining us over there. Some quick housekeeping before we dive in today. Again, it's Oh and Another Thing, your host, Vince Patrone with you, Bertram Beans, our producer on the other side of the glass, and Giovanna in the house to keep us on track and fact check us while we go. Woo! Back for another week. Again, thank you for joining us. If you are listening on Spotify, do us a favor, though, and go check us out over on YouTube. Give us a subscribe over there. Leave us a rating. Leave us a comment. Act as if we are a program that you actually enjoy. Do the things for the YouTube video. I don't know who you stan on YouTube these days. I know all the YouTube stars are being taken down, thankfully. Only the bad ones. Only the bad ones, I know, but... So whoever's left for you guys to stand over there, add me to your list, I guess. Anyway, so if you're listening on YouTube, go check us out on Spotify. We have a audio-only version where you don't have to see, how's my hair today? How's the lighting? Have they added any new portraits to the background? You can have a noise-free edition of Oh and Another Thing over on Spotify, over on Apple Podcasts, over on wherever you find your podcast. Just search for us. Subscribe to us, never miss an O and Another Thing pod. All right, so a lot to talk about today, so let's do a couple of headlines real quick. We have more Senate testimony today from Dr. Fauci and other health officials. Today, Fauci testified that we're not likely. We may reach 100,000 coronavirus cases per day if things do not turn around. And, of course, we know whenever he says things don't turn around, he means people don't start wearing masks. And we slow down our reopening process. I want to take a second real quick to stop here and talk about the reopening process. We have seen, and it makes me most nervous because I'm a New Yorker who works in the hospitality industry, and I worry about my fellow New Yorkers also. We've seen around the country, mostly in the South and in the West, that when you open indoor dining and when you open up the bars again, you have an explosion in cases. In fact, not even just in the South and West anymore. I believe yesterday they were up to 46 states having an increase in coronavirus positive tests. Even if you look at Pennsylvania, which is why I'm even more nervous. Pennsylvania had things under control. As of last week, Pennsylvania had one of the lowest positive test rates. In fact, their rates were going down drastically. I think we were top in the nation here in New York, but I think Pennsylvania on that list you had pulled up of percentage rates was at least in the bottom 5, right? So this is a state that was doing well, had taken the precautions, had flattened the curve, so to speak. Then we find out over the weekend, after everybody's flooded bars and gone to the south side and south side. Yeah, south side's where the bars are. Thank you. Okay. Gone to the south side in Pittsburgh and went out to the bars and had their sandwiches and got to go to their brunch and have their flights of beers and have their chicken and waffles and have their croque madames and all that junk. I don't know. I don't know what they're eating at brunch in Pittsburgh. So, boom. Explosion of cases in Allegheny County. 90 cases reported over the weekend. To the point where they have to now re-shut down the bars and go back into phase 2 where they don't have bars and they don't have indoor dining. Because they had this explosion of cases in a region where things were better. And in a region that I'm familiar with the mindset of because I'm from that region. Granted, I'm not from Pittsburgh. Lord knows I wish I was. I'm from a town up north of Pittsburgh, about an hour and a half, called Du Bois. Shout out to Du Bois. Also, shout out to Du Bois. We're not going to try to drag down the town today, but I know a lot of folks in that area and in that region don't buy into wearing masks. They don't buy into social distancing. A lot of people in Western Pennsylvania, not all, I know there are the good folks of Western Pennsylvania, the good folks of Du Bois, Pennsylvania, the good folks of Brockway, and the good folks of St. Mary's, and the good folks of Bradford, and the good folks of Oil City and Franklin, and the good folks of, I'm sure I left out one of the towns out. I left out multiple. McKees Rocks, maybe. Bilger's Rocks. There's this great thing about Pennsylvania, sidebar here, where you can really take a landmass at a locality, and you have it. Name, landmass, locality. So, example, there's a place outside of Clearfield, Pennsylvania. Shout out to another town in Pennsylvania, western Pennsylvania, called Bilger's Rocks, Pennsylvania. All it is like an intersection right outside this other town called Kernsville, where my mother's from. Yeah, that's okay. I don't think I gave away anything there. So you can go outside Kernsville, there's this place called Bilger's Rocks. There's nothing there. Just an example of how they name towns in Pennsylvania. So I digress. You have all these small towns and these people in these towns that do not want to wear masks. And then they go out and they think that they can dine in restaurants still. And you have an explosion of cases. And it's happening everywhere. And it's not just a Pennsylvania problem. People like that don't just exist in Pennsylvania, because we've seen the explosion in these tests, and these positive tests, have come from people below the age of 30. And guess what? There's a ton of all around New York City. People under the age of 30. And guess what people under the age of 30 in New York City like to do on their weekends? Go have brunch in crowded restaurants and then wait in line to get into those crowded restaurants and then bump elbows with the people next to them. I don't understand it. I love going out to eat in New York City, but there is something to be said about the overcrowding of NYC restaurants. We have an interesting predicament here in the city where everything is incredibly small. There are not I shouldn't say there aren't, because there are some examples of places that are kind of large. Fifth Hammer Brewing down in Long Island City, a larger space. But the majority of spaces in New York City that have restaurants in them tend to be kind of cramped little spots. Great example, the place I work right now, shout out to my employer, is inside of an old church. We're in the old chapel of the old church. We have about 14 seats inside this little fucking tunnel, essentially. We can't dine inside. I don't want people coming in there and getting their germs all over us while we're trying to make their lattes and avocado toast. That's not what we're here for. So I'm urging New York City, I'm urging de Blasio, I'm urging Cuomo, if for some reason they are listening, or you're someone listening that can get to them, tell them, one, to tune into Own, another thing, we could use listeners, and two, that we shouldn't go to phase 3. That phase 2 is going fine right now. Perfectly content to have people eating outside. Once you bring them inside, that's when the problems start. And once you let them start drinking inside again, that's when the problems start. So, a word of caution to the fine government of New York City. I say that because we live in a police coup, and I'm worried that they're going to hunt me down. It's a real fear to have right now. What a wild time to be alive. What else we got Bert, what else we got for headlines? Anything else for me today? Stimulus programs nearing its end. They still have $130 billion to use. Oh, Biden's expected to escalate his criticisms of Trump on coronavirus as cases grow nationwide. Before we started recording today, Biden did have a campaign event, I think it's still going on right now, where he was talking about wearing masks and sounding like a leader and sounding like someone that you would want to lead your country. So shout out to that happening, and shout out to him attacking Trump over something very attackable, which is his poor response to the coronavirus that unarguably has led to the death of 120,000 people. Sidebar here for the episode. We have a lot of sidebars today before we get to the nitty-gritty of things. There was a video out last week that was circulating right-wing media and right-wing Twitter. And it was of Joe Biden saying that 120 million people had died of coronavirus. What the video didn't show was Joe Biden immediately correcting that and saying 120,000. Remember that there are also millions of people infected with coronavirus, so it's not hard to understand why that would happen, why he would make that confusion. But how telling is it of conservatives and Republicans that to fight in this election, they have to pick at straws over verbal gaffes that are fixed moments later and then have to use doctored video to get their point across? That speaks so much to what Republicans and what conservatives want you to see, is that they have to force manipulate videos to get you to see their point of view. What they tried to say Joe Biden said was not what Joe Biden said. He cleaned it up immediately afterward and fixed it immediately afterward. And maybe it's not the best strategy to brag that the person you're campaigning for and the person that you are in favor of in this election, so to speak, is the person responsible for 120,000 deaths from the coronavirus. 2 Vietnams. Are we past 2 Vietnams now? I never passed 2 Vietnams, regardless. Crazy. Imagine that being your argument. So it was fun going on Twitter and seeing everybody asking all these Trump sycophants what the real number was. How many people really died? Because then they can't respond because it's not any better. It's not any better. So if this is their strategy going forward, I feel a lot better about November. Not enough to not donate to campaigns, state committees, and all that. Make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're being active. Make sure you are part of the process this go around. That way we get the change we need. We had a great example this week of why we need that change, and we're going to go over the New York Times real quick here. This right off their website. Little story behind it first. On Saturday, a report came out that the president had been briefed on a Russian bounty scheme that was paying Russia was paying Taliban forces to kill U.S. forces in Afghanistan. So Russia had set up a bounty program where for every U.S. soldier killed by a member of the Taliban, a Taliban, listen to me, who am I, an insurance salesman from Pennsylvania? Jeeps. From the Taliban, any U.S. casualty caused by the Taliban would get paid money from Russia. Okay. Reports came out that the president knew about this program from briefings he'd received earlier this year. All right. So then yesterday, we find out that American officials provided, and this is right from the New York Times, a written briefing in late February to President Trump, laying out their conclusion that a Russian military intelligence unit offered and paid bounties to Taliban-linked militants to kill U.S. and coalition troops in Afghanistan, confirmed by 2 officials familiar with the matter. Reports on Saturday were that the president had been briefed on these Russian bounties placed by Russia on U.S. troops in Afghanistan. We had reports on Saturday that he knew about it. Obviously, that took us to the first excuse, which we always have to have with this president, with this administration, which was that he was never actually briefed. So the first story from the White House that we were given was that the president and vice president hadn't been briefed at all, and it was a lie from the New York Times. That's what we got from the White House, and that's what we got from the president. Then he stated in the same tweet that they found the threat that he wasn't briefed on not credible. So that's why they didn't brief him on it. He said that they'd had a discussion with Intel over the weekend, and Intel explained to him that they didn't find it a credible threat, so they didn't brief him on it. That the threat wasn't credible, and that there was even discussions at the time over whether or not they had conflicting intelligence saying that Russia was not doing this, which, quick side here, if you have intelligence that says Russia's not doing something, I wouldn't believe that intelligence. Because as we've seen time and time again, when there's belief that Russia is doing something illegal, or maybe not illegal, but morally wrong and dangerous, they're likely doing something morally wrong and dangerous. So for them to say that the threat wasn't credible and they thought that there was other sources that had information that said Russia wasn't doing this should be a red flag to everybody. But then we find out from, I believe, another New York Times story. New York Times, though they stink, have been doing a pretty good job with this story. Came out with a story that they believed at least 20 troop casualties could be linked to this bounty system. This was another story that came out after investigations into deaths from the Pentagon even. Not deaths at the Pentagon, but investigation from the Pentagon into these deaths. Found that there was a link to 20 of these deaths in Afghanistan. Again, 20 killings of U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan by Taliban forces linked to this Russian bounty system. Which makes you then have to ask, what made them declare this threat not credible, and what is not credible about a threat that led to the deaths of at least 20 soldiers in the region? What is not credible about that? So at this point, the White House and Senate, not the White House, the House and the Senate are asking to be briefed on this so that they can find out what happened and have since been briefed on it. Multiple senators on both sides have come out and said that no, there was definitely something in that intelligence that they should have listened to, and that they would like to do a further investigation into it. And I think they should. Do I think we should do another impeachment over this? boy, I'm torn on that because I, for one, think that we should do another impeachment over this. It's just not the right time, probably. If there's ever an argument to say that it is too close to an election for an impeachment, this is the time for it. I don't love that because that means that essentially we're allowing a president the next 5 months to do literally whatever the hell he wants, which isn't great. Should we have hearings? Should we have testimonies? Absolutely. I want to hear from everybody involved. But I don't think we can impeach the president on this. I want us to. Absolutely. We could if it weren't 4 months out from an election, which thank goodness it is. But to put it this way, if the House of Representatives, in the middle of a pandemic, at a time when, as we reported earlier in the headlines, the stimulus package is about to end, cases are on the rise, things aren't looking like they're going to be able to reopen as soon as we thought, we might have to have things shut down until a virus comes. The economy is not going to get any better if that is the case. If the House took time away from trying to get resources to American people and to U.S. citizens, the same thing, I know it's redundant, it would not be a good look for the House of Representatives to even launch this, especially during an election season. I know that is shitty to say, to play electoral politics with this. We often preach against that, but that is the reality of it with voters. If the House wanted to say, we're going to impeach the president, yes, it would do great things with the Democratic base. It would pull well with progressives and extremely liberal people, but once you get into moderate territory, you're going to start to lose some moderates on it, even though it's for a very justifiable cause. If the president knew that Russia was sending the Taliban to hunt U.S. forces, to hunt U.S. soldiers, absolutely he should be held accountable for that. And absolutely everybody involved in it should be held accountable for that. And if that means they do go forward with impeachment, great. And maybe they do have enough bipartisan support to go forward with an impeachment. Great. That gives us 4 months of a Mike Pence presidency, which will also be a calamity, but at least it'll feel safer. I digress. This is when we find out, going back, after they'd had the briefing in the House and the Senate from Radcliffe, the new DNI. You guys remember Radcliffe from the impeachment hearings. He was the guy who wore the really big ties and was also really incompetent. Anyway. He wore really big ties and was very incompetent. Anyway, so then we find out that Trump was, in fact, briefed on these bounties. He was briefed on it. Or at least they attempted to brief Trump on the bounties or on the intelligence they had, as it was featured in a written briefing for the president on February 27th, per one of the sources in the New York Times article. They had two. One who said that it was... the briefing was given to the written briefing was given to the president late in February. Another of their sources said it was given to him on approximately February 27th. So, with that in mind, what was Trump doing on February 27th? We did some research. What was in the news on February 27th? The circuit courts, had handed Trump a victory that would allow him to grant money to sanctuary cities. So he was busy celebrating that. He was also busy celebrating that in Kentucky, a Republican had flipped a seat held by a Democrat for 50 years. Also, the Mets lost to the Marlins in their spring training game that day. Not as important, but worth noting. So the problems with this are very obvious. First off, and let's start with what may not be as obvious as to how bad all of this is and how wrong all of this is, for the president to again know in some capacity that Russia had put bounties on U.S. soldiers' heads to have them hunted down and killed in Afghanistan by the Taliban is not good at all, even at its surface. But once you start peeling back the layers, it gets worse and worse. For example, Russia obviously felt emboldened enough to do this, to put bounties on the heads of U.S. soldiers fighting in Afghanistan. I know this is something you could argue. However, do we think that they would have done something like this with any other president in office? Russia clearly feels like they have more wiggle room to cause chaos and sow chaos in the Middle East because of who the president is. And this speaks to the United States' loss of clout alert, loss of clout on the world stage and in foreign relations. There was a story on CNN last night, on their website, I should say. We don't watch cable news in this house. We just get it from the internet. We get the clips from Twitter. Anyway, so the story outlined numerous reports and testimonials about President Trump way he is on the phone, the way he talks to world leaders. And some skepticism aside for CNN, we know that they are the toughest of the networks and possibly all media outlets on the president, and with good reason. We're not condemning them for being tough on the president, just pointing out that they do tend to be the toughest on the president. Anyway, in that story, they talked about how Trump has managed to alienate us from our enemies while embracing authoritarians around the world, coddling up to Putin. Coddling up to Putin in phone calls that often sound like, and this is from the CNN story, friends talking in a sweat lodge. Again, reported in the phone calls with Putin. And lots of phone calls, like twice weekly phone calls with Erdogan of Turkey, who is, as you know, Putin's closest ally in the region. All right. There's also been multiple phone calls with the president. And these are from people inside the White House who reported to the CNN over the past 4 years that this has been happening. He does it with every authoritarian you can imagine. He does it again with Putin. He does it with Erdogan. He did it with Mohammed bin Salman in Turkey. In Saudi Arabia. You'll remember what came out from John Bolton's book 2 weeks ago. There was a story about how the president knowingly deflected news coverage away from Mohammed bin Salman's involvement in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi by confronting a story about Ivanka using her private email server to do business. I believe it was in China. It was with her trademarks. If you guys remember that story, the president made us think about it on Twitter, and it totally pulled the media's attention away from what was happening in the investigation into the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, which MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, was heavily involved in. So we know that the president makes these deals on the phone. We know that he has these conversations on the phone. We know how he is. And we know who these leaders are, and we know what they do is wish death upon America. And we have found that they have found it easier to pursue that kind of agenda, if you will, an anti-American agenda in their region as long as Trump is president. That's why China also endorsed him 3 weeks ago now. China endorsed him to be for re-election because they know they can do what they want whenever he is president, because they know that he is a weak, ineffectual leader. We know these leaders wish death upon us, and we know that they found a way the president has found a way to get into their good graces. And we also know from this report how he speaks with our allies. This was another shocking thing. He called Angela Merkel stupid to her, not to her face, but to her ear on a phone call. He called her stupid. This is someone who is a physicist. Donald Trump is a reality TV host who bankrupted 3 casinos at least and has a shitty golf course out by the Whitestone Bridge. Why the fuck would you put a golf course out by the Whitestone Bridge? Ugh. Anyway, we can assume that all other problems with this situation stem from our most fervent enemies seeing an opportunity with Trump as president to push their agendas. Second, if the president wasn't briefed on this, why has he done nothing to this point? Why, when they began to find out about these bounties being real, and when they began investigating these bounties, and they began investigating these troop deaths in Afghanistan, did the president still do nothing with the knowledge that he has now? Again, we found out about him knowing about this on Saturday. We found out that he had been briefed about it earlier, and not one word had been mentioned. However, we now know that the president was in fact briefed on this issue in a written briefing, again on February 27th, in a written brief, which only goes to prove that the president isn't reading his intelligence briefing, which is literally his job as president to do. The president has a lot of jobs. That's why it was such a problem that we elected Trump in the first place, because we know he wasn't good at the one job that he already was doing, which was managing casinos and properties. And being a personality, which he also was doing a shitty job at being a personality, because if your whole personality is being a racist birther who calls Mexican rapists whenever you start your presidential campaign, I don't think your character is that great. Well, I digress. But since then, more reports have come out, and we are learning today that the president wasn't... This is so fucking ridiculous. And he's thrilled to hear this. He wasn't verbally briefed on the situation with Russia, again, paying the Taliban to hunt U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. He wasn't verbally briefed on the situation, which, again, shouldn't fucking matter at all. The President of the United States shouldn't need to have everything read to him. Okay. My mom used to read to us whenever we fell asleep, me and my brother. She read us all of the... Can I say Harry Potter still? Am I allowed to say that I've had Harry Potter read to me? Okay. So my mom used to read Harry Potter to me and my brother when we were falling asleep at night. Bear in mind that we were children in elementary school. And I don't think my brother could read that well yet because he was still very young. So my mom would read this to us. But again, we were children. At a point, it becomes unusual to have everything read to you. I will say that. So the president has to have these intelligence briefings read to him. Him not doing his job and reading these himself is a massive problem. And now we're seeing a national security problem because, again, he's allowing U.S. citizens volunteering their lives to serve the country. He's allowing them to be hunted by the Taliban for money paid by Russia. All right. And then the other question is, instead of being thrilled to find out that he wasn't verbally briefed, the president was thrilled to find that out this morning, that he was never verbally briefed, or that the story is that he was never verbally briefed today. Instead of being mad that he wasn't briefed on this, he seems to be wearing this badge of, oh, I don't know, I wasn't briefed, as some kind of good thing to have, when he should be incredibly mad that because of someone not doing their job somewhere in the chain of command with his briefings, Russia has literally empowered the Taliban to, again, play manhunt with U.S. soldiers in the region. He should be mad, but instead he seems thrilled to know that there is a way he might not have known about it, which is still his fault. None of this is good. And then today we find out that he knew as far back as 2019 we found this, because they've been investigating the killing of 3 soldiers involved in an ambush in Afghanistan that led all 3 to be killed. And they've traced these killings back to that bounty program. And in that time, since these killings have been traced back to the bounty program by the Pentagon again, the Pentagon traced it back, the president has had multiple conversations, a meeting, and other correspondences with Vladimir Putin and Russia, where we know this was never brought up, as sources, again, from the original story reported that they recommended sets of actions and sets of sanctions against Russia, but nothing came of it, except an invitation to the G7, which Russia was thrown out of after they annexed Crimea. This is what the president does. This is the America we are living in. This is the foreign policy that has been created. If you are someone with a family member in the United States military right now, you should be... I shouldn't tell people how to feel, but if you're not mad about this, if you're a U.S. citizen, if you're anybody and you're not mad about this, I don't know what to tell you. Then you are missing possibly the most corrupt action a president has taken since the president used military assistance to Ukraine to extort Ukraine to create political dirt on Joe Biden, who he's now running against as president. 2 of the most corrupt things to happen in the history of U.S. policy, in the U.S. of history diplomacy, have happened with this president. And every time it comes down to this defense of, well, the president didn't actually know what was going on. The president had no idea. He wasn't aware. We never made him aware of it. It was never brought up to him. He didn't need to know. We didn't feel like we had to tell him. He didn't know about it. It's not a good thing for the president to be ignorant to the things happening in the world around them. This shouldn't be okay. This shouldn't be fine. This isn't good leadership. Let's take a step here. In all of this, the thing that the president does best is try to distract us from the real issue, which he attempted to do on Sunday morning whenever he was on his way to go play golf at his Virginia golf course, because he canceled his New Jersey trip to protect D.C. and the nation's capital from lawless heathens or whatever, law and order and all that shit, when in fact it was just rainy in Bedminster this weekend. So he goes to Virginia, and on his way to the course, he tweets out a video of, that's unbelievable, of a group of retired seniors at the Villages, I don't know where, I think it was Florida, the Villages, having a MAGA golf cart parade. Okay. So if you haven't seen the video, I want you to picture now a bunch of old white folks in a retirement community driving golf carts with tiny flags on them, yelling and screaming about how much they love the president, tooting their horns, and again, driving their little golf carts around their retirement community. They were met by counter-protesters, or I guess by protesters, because they're not counter-protesting anything, they're just protesting the president being shitty. So shout out to these woke old people in the villages confronting this golf cart parade, this MAGA golf cart parade. But at the beginning of the video, there's a back and forth between a man in a golf cart on the Trump side and a man holding a Joe Biden side. And they get into a back and forth, and before driving off, the man in the golf cart yells, white power, twice at this other white dude there for Joe Biden. Just starts shouting white power. And the president put this up on his Twitter feed. There's obvious problems to this. I don't need to spell out to you why it is problematic that the President of the United States was sharing a video of someone yelling a white nationalist rallying cry, one that had been used for the Klan, that has been used in every white nationalist circle that you can imagine. It's white power. It's all lives matter without the frills. Let's say that real quick. If you see someone saying all lives matter on the internet this week, remember that they are just being fancy white power people, because all lives matter is really just a dolled up version of white power. I want that to be known right now. You agree with that? That all lives matter is just pretty much a politically correct way of saying white power?
Yeah.
You think that's fair? That's fair to say? Okay. So whenever someone is saying all lives matter, they are just trying to doll up their white power phrasing, because again, all lives matter is just done to take away from the Black Lives Matter movement. And if you are against the Black Lives Matter movement, you are inherently a racist, and you probably believe white lives that white lives are the ones that matter. Because again, you don't use that argument any other time except for whenever Black Lives Matter protests are happening. So I will digress. We then get the latest round of excuses for why the president tweeted this video. Why would he tweet this video of one of his supporters saying white power? Why would he do that? How could he do that? And then we start to get the excuses. Ben Shapiro said it's likely the president didn't have his sound on his computer when he watched the video. Get over here. Get over here.
It makes me so mad every time something like this happens and he retweets something and people try to say, oh, well, he didn't watch the full video. Oh, well, he didn't watch it with the sound on. He's the president of the United States. He needs to fully vet everything that he retweets. That's not an excuse. That doesn't make it any better, because it means that he didn't care to listen because he saw someone supporting him and he didn't care to do any research on that person. Yeah. I also don't believe that he would listen to something without the sound on, because he's old and he holds his phone really far away from him. Like, he absolutely has the sound on. I'm sorry.
We both have parents.
Who are old.
Who are, well, yeah, okay, who are...
Mine are old, at least.
Our parents about the same age. About the same age. Your dad's a little older, but otherwise.
My dad is a year or two younger than Trump, and his phone is on full volume all the time.
All the time.
He's never watched something without the volume on.
And this goes for not even just your dad. All old dudes love watching videos with their phone volume turned all the way up. You can walk down the street in New York and you're bound to walk behind at least 3 dudes who have their phone volume turned all the way up playing something. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be music. It could be a phone conversation. It's at full blast and it's on speakerphone. That's what they do.
Yeah.
Like,
but again, it doesn't even matter. Even if for some reason he did watch it without the sound on. You're the president. You're held to a higher standard. You don't get to just retweet stuff without watching it. And that's not a good reason.
Yeah. And I want to point out that you can't mistake white power for anything else if you're just watching the video. Turn the volume off for a second. I don't endorse what I'm about to say. Again, I do not love the phrase white power.
Yeah.
If I say white power, you can't see me saying anything else with my mouth than white power. Yeah. That's it.
Like, easy to make out.
It's easy to make out, so even if your phone volume is off for some reason.
Did you see the guy's...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's right in on his face. Like, you can see his face saying it.
Yeah.
I've already said it too many times on the pod.
Yeah.
I can't say it again. I get
Well, it
like
also
10.
just goes to show you we've had like 3 examples of this happening before. Like, this is not the first time that Trump has retweeted something that was white supremacist. Like, he does that often. Or the first time he's retweeted something that he's then had to go back and say, oh, I didn't watch the full video. So clearly, if he's just retweeting this stuff because he sees that they're in support of Trump, that shows you that overall people who support Trump tend to be on the side of white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
And he should have learned that by now and learned that he needs to not just retweet stuff without reading it.
And it's funny because that's like, they go to this, he just missed that part. Because then they say that he probably heard the rest of the video because he retweeted it because he was trying to, exactly what you said, he was trying to show support for people who support him. And it's like, is that the person we want running the country? The person who has to give full-throated support to his white supremacist followers? Is that who the American president should be? But every time they make this debate, it goes back to accountability, which is a pillar of leadership. I'm sorry to use the term pillar of leadership on the pod, but accountability is key to a leader. And Trump this week, and just this week, has done or been found to have done some pretty disgusting things, including the video he retweeted that he will not be accountable for, that he will not allow himself to be accountable for, that his White House, his press secretary, the people around him will not allow him to be held responsible for. With the Russian bounties that he didn't know about, which we actually just got more reporting on, that they had evidence because they found large money transfers. This is just from the New York Times moments ago. They found large money transfers from Russian military bank accounts, a Russian military bank account into a Taliban-linked bank account. So the evidence is all there. This wasn't just some fucking thing that they came up with, that the Times came up with to report on, or some little bits and crumbs of something. This is a real problem. I don't want to call it just a scandal, because this isn't just a scandal. This is a problem. And he's not going to be held accountable for it, and he's not going to allow himself to be held accountable for it. It was the same with the white power video he put out on his Twitter. He just missed that part. And you know what is funny to me is how smart conservatives think they are. They always go to this high ground, this mental high ground. Well, we read all about the Constitution. Well, we believe Alexander Hamilton to be the greatest leader of all time. Well, we believe that Benjamin Franklin would have been a damned fine president. Like, they have this high-minded way of thinking about them. And maybe Ben Franklin would have been a good president. I don't know. Not my job to say. But it's funny because they are happy to do this whole high and mighty thing. You know, Ted Cruz on Twitter is always galaxy brain thinking everything he can. But they're so happy to be led around the nose about everything. They're so happy to just get led from one excuse to the other from the president and this White House. How happy they are to be led through every mound of evidence to the contrary. Just as long as the president and as long as the Republican Party is saying it, that's who they go with. They are so unwilling to look into the truth of the matter. They are so happy to just go fucking with the flow of everything. Just willy-nilly, oh, well, I don't trust what the news says because Ted Cruz is telling me something different. And I like Ted Cruz because he's an elected official and I would vote for him, which is why he says what he says. It's like put the two and two together. We're not blindly supporting everything Democrats do. We give them a bit of scrutiny. Anyway. And he didn't know. And they're happy. They're happy that this is what their president is putting out there. They're fine to hear that, oh, well, the president didn't know about this. He was unaware of what was going on in Russia. He was unaware of the old man saying white power in the start of that video. They're for some reason so fine with having someone at the helm that is just oblivious. It's just an oblivious leader. Rudderless, if you will, who doesn't read his briefings or check the videos he is posting to his Twitter. One of the worst defenses we got this week of the president's tweet was that he wanted to show support to his supporters who have to face consequences for supporting him, aka being called out for their misguided and wrongful beliefs. Should a president work to show support for his supporters who ride golf carts yelling white power? Does that make any of this any better? It does not. thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for joining us this week. We'll keep you guys updated on everything going on. This, obviously, the Russian bounties will be an ongoing story. Hopefully they find a way to just nail the president to this. They found it 5 times. I truly believe this could be a thing. I mean, he's already so far down in the polls, and I don't want to discredit what the Trump campaign can do and what the Republican Party can do in terms of cheating and voter suppression and all of that. But this is the kind of story that if the New York Times and if other media outlets can find a way to just not let this one go away, that it has to move the needle with some of these moderates who believe in supporting the troops. And we all should believe in supporting the troops. But you know what I'm saying. The people that make that their whole rallying cry. Why they vote for Republicans. Why they vote for Donald Trump. Because he believes in the military. Because he's fought for our veterans. Because he's fought for our troops. Has he fought for our troops? Has he fought for our veterans? This is real contradictory evidence to any campaign message he would have on being strong with the military and being strong with military support, because what is less supportive than our military than, again, to allow Russia to pay the Taliban to hunt them down in the streets? Thank you for listening. Have a great rest of your week. We will be back on Friday with more and another thing. Again, if you made it this far, you might as well subscribe. You might as well tell us we did a good job. Do everything you would do again for a program you enjoy. Thank you for listening. Have a good rest of your week.